The Mongols killed 40 million people, burned cities to ash, made pyramids from skulls. But here's what nobody tells you. They also made merchants the richest they'd ever been in human history. You think Jeff Bezos invented global logistics? Genghis Khan beat him by 800 years. And he did it without a single computer. The Mongols didn't just conquer the world, they accidentally invented it. This is the story of how the most violent empire in history created the first global economy, and why it all came crashing down. If you're ready to see how conquest created commerce, and how a bunch of nomads on horses built a system that even modern economists can't fully explain, then hit that subscribe button. Because what you're about to learn will change how you see every supply chain, every trade deal, and every border crossing in the modern world. Let's go. Imagine you're a merchant in 1200 AD. You want to move silk from China to Europe. Sounds simple, right? Wrong. Between you and your destination are a dozen kingdoms, each with different currencies, different laws, different bandits, and different warlords who all want a cut. Every border crossing is a negotiation. Every road is a gamble. The Silk Road isn't a road. It's a death trap wrapped in paperwork. Your profit margin? Maybe 5% if you're lucky and don't get murdered. Now imagine this. One empire controls everything from Korea to Poland. One set of laws. One passport. One currency system that actually works. Bandits? Executed on sight. Corrupt officials? Same. You can move goods 5,000 miles without changing hands more than twice. Your profit margin just jumped to 30%. Welcome to Pax Mongolica, the Mongol Peace. The most efficient free trade zone in human history, built on top of the largest graveyard humanity had ever seen. But here's the twist. The Mongols didn't plan any of this. They were nomads. They didn't even use money until they conquered people who did. They stumbled backward into creating global capitalism. And it all started with one man who understood something that most emperors never figured out. Dead people don't pay taxes. Genghis Khan wasn't just a conqueror. He was a systems thinker. When he took a city, he had a choice. Burn it down and make an example, or turn it into a cash machine. Early in his career, he chose the first option a lot. Cities that resisted got deleted from existence. But Genghis noticed something. The cities that surrendered immediately and kept producing stuff made him way richer than the cities he reduced to rubble. It's basic incentive design. If you destroy everything, you get nothing. If you create a system where traders feel safe and productive, you get a cut of everything forever. So Genghis made a deal with the merchant class. You keep trading, I keep you alive. Simple, brutal, effective. But protection was only step one. The real genius was in the infrastructure. The Mongols built something called the Yam system. Think of it as the world's first FedEx, except instead of trucks, they used horses. And instead of tracking numbers, they used silver tablets called paisas that functioned as passports, credit cards, and get-out-of-jail-free cards all in one. Here's how it worked. Every 40 miles across the entire empire, there was a Yam station. Fresh horses, food, shelter. A messenger could cross Asia in weeks instead of months. But it wasn't just for government mail. Merchants could use it too if they had the right credentials. Suddenly, information moved at the speed of a galloping horse, instead of the speed of a walking caravan. You could send a letter from Beijing to Baghdad faster than you can get a package from Amazon to your house today if you account for distance. But speed wasn't even the best part. The best part was trust. See, the Mongols did something revolutionary. They made the empire guarantee your safety. If you got robbed on a Mongol road, the local governor had to compensate you out of his own pocket. Then he had to hunt down the bandits and execute them publicly. This wasn't charity. This was incentive engineering. Governors who let their roads turn into bandit highways lost their jobs. And their heads. The result? The Silk Road became safer than a modern highway. Merchants traveled with less security than they needed in their home cities. One Persian historian wrote that a woman carrying a sack of gold could walk from one end of the empire to the other without fear. That's not propaganda. That's a functioning legal system backed by overwhelming violence against anyone who breaks it. And when people feel safe, they spend money. But the Mongols didn't stop at security. They standardized everything: weights and measures, currency exchange rates, contracts. Before the Mongols, every region had its own system. A pound in Samarkand wasn't a pound in Beijing. A contract signed in Persia meant nothing in Russia. It was chaos. The Mongols looked at this mess and said, "New rule, one system. If you're in the empire, you follow empire standards." Suddenly, a merchant in Venice could do business with a merchant in Hangzhou without spending 3 months arguing about conversion rates. Transaction costs collapsed. Trade exploded. Now let's talk about the thing that made all of this possible, but that most people completely ignore: religious tolerance. The Mongols didn't care what god you prayed to, as long as you paid your taxes and didn't rebel. Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, Jews, everyone was welcome. This wasn't because the Mongols were enlightened progressives. They were pragmatic. They realized that if you persecute half your population for their religion, you lose half your tax base. But the side effect was incredible. Cities under Mongol rule became cosmopolitan hubs. Mosques next to churches, next to temples. Scholars from different faiths arguing philosophy in the same coffee house. And where diverse people gather, ideas have sex with each other. Innovations that took centuries to spread before were now jumping continents in decades. Paper money moved from China to Persia. Arabic numerals moved west. Gunpowder moved everywhere. The Mongols became the world's biggest idea smugglers without even trying. And the financial innovations? Off the charts. The Mongols embraced paper money in a big way. Kublai Khan issued the first true fiat currency. Money backed by nothing except the empire's promise that it had value. Merchants loved it because paper was lighter than silver. The government loved it because they could print more whenever they needed it. If this sounds familiar, it's because it's basically how modern money works. Kublai Khan invented quantitative easing 600 years before central banks did. Of course, he also discovered inflation when he printed too much. Turns out you can't just make unlimited money without consequences. Who knew? But before inflation caught up, the system worked beautifully. Credit networks formed. A merchant in one city could write a note promising payment, and a merchant 2,000 miles away would accept it because the Mongol legal system enforced contracts. This is modern banking, built by an empire that didn't even have cities 50 years earlier. European merchants noticed. For the first time in history, they could actually reach China directly instead of relying on middlemen. Marco Polo is the most famous example, but he wasn't alone. Hundreds of European traders made the journey. They came back with stories of cities bigger than anything in Europe, technologies that seemed like magic, and most importantly, business opportunities. The Mongols had accidentally created the first global market, and for about a century, it was glorious. Trade volumes increased by orders of magnitude. Cities like Samarkand and Tabriz became richer than most kingdoms. The merchant class became so powerful that even nobles envied them. Some traders accumulated wealth that would make them billionaires in today's money. But here's where the story takes a dark turn, because the same roads that carried silk and spices also carried something else: disease. The Black Death. The plague. The single deadliest pandemic in human history. And it spread so efficiently because the Mongols had made travel so efficient. Rats carrying infected fleas hitched rides on trade caravans. Ships docked in ports across 3 continents. The same yam system that moved messages in weeks moved the plague just as fast. By 1350, a third of Europe was dead. The Middle East lost a similar percentage. China's population collapsed. The global economy that the Mongols built became a global graveyard. And the Mongols themselves couldn't stop it because disease doesn't care about military superiority. You can't conquer a bacteria. But even before the plague hit, cracks were forming in the system. The Mongol Empire was too big to govern as one unit. After Genghis died, his descendants split it into 4 khanates: the Golden Horde in Russia, the Ilkhanate in Persia, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, and the Yuan dynasty in China. At first they cooperated, but cooperation requires trust, and trust requires communication, and eventually the khanates stopped talking to each other. They started fighting instead. The Pax Mongolica depended on unity. Once that broke, the whole system started to crumble. Trade routes became battlegrounds again. Merchants who'd felt safe for decades suddenly needed armed escorts. The Yam system fell apart because nobody wanted to maintain stations in hostile territory. By 1400, the free trade zone was gone. The tariffs came back. The bandits came back. The Silk Road returned to being exactly what it was before the Mongols: a slow, dangerous, expensive mess. And Europe, which had gotten a taste of Asian goods and couldn't go back, started looking for alternative routes. This is why Columbus sailed west. He wasn't exploring for fun. He was trying to find a new way to reach Asia because the old way had collapsed. The Mongols didn't just create global trade. Their collapse created the age of exploration. Every time you see a map of colonial empires, you're looking at the after effects of the Mongol free trade zone ending. But here's the thing that should terrify and fascinate you in equal measure. We're living in a new Pax Mongolica right now. Global supply chains, international law, free trade agreements, container ships moving goods across oceans, the internet moving information at light speed. It's all the same idea: reduce friction, increase safety, standardize systems, and watch wealth explode. And just like the original, it's fragile. The Mongol system collapsed because the empire fragmented and disease spread, and nobody maintained the roads. Sound familiar? We've got fragmenting trade blocks, we've got pandemics, we've got infrastructure that's aging because nobody wants to pay for maintenance. The Mongols built the greatest economic system of the medieval world in less than a century, and it collapsed almost as fast. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And right now it's rhyming pretty loud. The lesson isn't that empires are good. The Mongols killed 40 million people, remember? The lesson is that economic systems are more fragile than we think. Safety requires constant enforcement. Standards require universal buy-in. Trust requires ruthless punishment of cheaters. The moment any of those break down, the whole thing unravels. Genghis Khan understood this. He built a system where the incentives aligned. Traders got rich, governors stayed honest out of fear, and the empire got a cut of everything. It was brutal, but it worked, until it didn't. So here's your final thought. The Mongols didn't invent global trade. Merchants have been moving goods across continents for thousands of years. What the Mongols invented was the infrastructure and legal framework that made global trade efficient and safe. They turned a dangerous gamble into a reliable business model, and in doing so, they showed us the blueprint for every free trade zone that came after. NAFTA, the European Union, the World Trade Organization. They're all trying to recreate what the Mongols built: one set of rules, one system of enforcement, and the promise that if you play by the rules, you'll get rich. The difference is we're trying to do it without the empire and without the executions. Whether that works long-term is still an open question. The Mongols proved you can build a global economy with horses and swords and ruthless efficiency. We're trying to prove you can build one with diplomacy and treaties and international cooperation. History will tell us which approach was more sustainable. But either way, next time you order something online and it shows up at your door 2 days later, remember, you're living in a system that a bunch of nomads on the Mongolian steppe invented 800 years ago. They just did it with more horses and more blood. If this video changed how you see global trade, hit that subscribe button, because we're just getting started on the economics of empire. Next time, we're diving into why the Romans couldn't figure out inflation, and how that destroyed the greatest military machine in ancient history. You won't want to miss it.